Welcome to the review of Isham Textbook Edition 8, Chapter 16, Sterile Storage and Transport. Okay, so now you've done all of the work necessary to get things sterile. You had to clean them according to the instructions. You had to sterilize them according to the instructions. You had to do prep and pack, following certain guidelines, making sure that the sterilant is able to reach all the surfaces, and you know all the things you had to do. It was a lot of work, right? So now it's going to be stored. Sterile storage actually begins when the sterilizer door opens. You have the process of the decontamination, and then the process of prep and pack, and then sterilization. Now, when the doors open, the items are sterile, still too hot to touch, but sterile nonetheless. So it is an issue or a matter of storage. So, too hot to touch. If the instruments sets or the instruments packs are hotter than the room, they're too hot to touch. And this is because residual moisture remaining in the packaging material could cause strike through. Little bacteria that are on your hands could be pulled, wicked directly through the packaging material and into the containers or the wrap sets. Not such an issue with containers. They're made of metal. Still though, it's a good policy to not touch the metal containers until they're cooled off as well. So same temperature as the room. Okay, now we're speaking specifically when I say area and air pressures, temperatures, and humidity levels. We are speaking specifically of a sterile storage area. This is not the same as an area that happens to be the same as your prep and pack, your big clean side of your department. Those pressures, humidities, and temperatures are not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a designated sterile storage area that is designed solely for the purpose of storing sterilized items and has a door, its own door. Okay. Near a sterile storage area, there should be connected to, adjacent to a sterile storage area, there should be a halfway room between the outside world and the sterile storage room. This is called a breakout room. This breakout room should be there because you should never bring cardboard or any outside shipping containers into the sterile storage area. So boxes can be brought into the breakout room, opened up, and then the items inside can be taken into the sterile storage area. And yes, I'm talking about things that come from the outside, perhaps a factory in California. They were ordered sterile, they were shipped sterile, and they made it to your hospital sterile, but they're in a box that is not clean. You should never bring outside shipping containers into the sterile storage area. So the sterile storage area should be designed and designated solely for the storage of sterile items. Non-sterile items should not be stored here. Excuse me. They could contaminate the outside of the packages. You're going to see times when you have things like shoulder slings and things of that nature that are not sterile but are clean. They are commonly stored in the same area where you have shoulder instrument sets and shoulder, what am I trying to say, ace bandages and things like that that are sterile. Don't let it bother you. Excuse me. So when you are, congratulations, you're designing a sterile storage area because you are a bigwig now in the industry and you get to design your own area. So some things to keep in mind. You need room. So figure out how much room you really need and then double it. Okay, and then when you go and you tell the people who are building the new department for you how much you need, way overblow it, so they'll get down to maybe what you actually need. You need a lot of room in a sterile processing department. Have you ever been in a Winco grocery store? How about a Walmart? If you've ever been in a Winco, you'll see the aisles are about twice as wide as they are in a Walmart. Easy to navigate without running into people or having people blocking your path. This is the way a sterile storage area should be designed. Wide aisles. Should also be designed so that it's easy to clean. If you can't clean your sterile storage area, you're going to have a sterile storage area that's full of dust, and well, that's contamination. Dust is contamination. Storage conditions. So you know that in the decontamination area, you have negative pressure, tender exchanges, temperature range of 60 to 65, and relative humidity of 30 to 60%. Okay, that's decontam. On the prep and pack side, you have 10 positive air exchanges with temperatures of 68 to 73 and relative humidity of 30 to 60%. Now, speaking specifically of a sterile storage area, you have positive pressure at 4 exchanges per hour, and you can have temperatures as high as 75 degrees, and you need to maintain less than 70% relative humidity. Other sterile storage considerations are this one. If you have an outside wall, a wall that the outside is on the other side of the wall, you need to keep any sterile items 2 inches or more away from that outside wall at all times, because the interior of an exterior wall can start sweating and it would contaminate the packs. Moisture is bad for sterile items. It's just bad. It's going to cause strike through. You need to make sure that you have enough light in your sterile storage area. Let's just apply that to the entire department. In the sterile storage area, you need to have between 200 and 500 lux of light. And lux is a unit of illumination that is equal to 1 lumen per square meter. And if you want more information on that, you're going to have to Google it. Okay, storage shelving. This is what we store things on. The most common shelving is it's known as open shelving. It's wire racks. This is common because it's easy to use, it's less expensive, it's easy to put things on and take things off. There's no doors to worry about. It actually will hold more than a completely closed shelving. However, as far as when it comes to protecting the things stored, the closed shelving is superior. Closed shelving you'll find in not usually in the central service or in the sterile storage area. You'll see them in trauma rooms, in the ER. You'll see them in ORs. They store things at the point of use where they could be needing them, and they need to keep them safe from things that could happen, like blood splashes. And actually, if you were to have something sterile in a room when they have the patient under surgery, when the patient's open, that sterile item should no longer be considered sterile. But let's think of closed shelving as the Lamborghini of shelving. That would be the most preferred. Your car that you drive, is it a Kia? Okay, that's not the car you prefer, right? What do you want, a Mustang? Yeah, you want a Mustang. Okay, so the most preferred type of shelving is the closed shelving. But the most common one is the Kia, the Hyundai Elantra. That's the one that you have. The advantages of the closed shelving are better protection. The disadvantage is the higher cost, and they don't really store as much on the shelves. And the open shelving is the most common, and it's the most convenient and least expensive. But it also leaves the packages more vulnerable to contamination from things like splashes during mopping or just people walking by. You know those narrow Walmart aisles and somebody left something hanging off the shelf, they bump it with a cart. Now it's a sterile item, it's going to become contaminated. So yes, shelving should be large enough, deep enough to hold whatever you're putting on it. Some trays, like a Nissan fundiplication set, they're like 2 feet long, and they're a little bit long for the shelves. In this kind of situation, find another way to put it on the shelf where it's not protruding into the aisle. Um, okay, so for sterile storage, the bottom shelf of every cart needs to be solid or have a plastic liner on it. And that's to protect it from dust that can be kicked up. I know there's not supposed to be dust on the floor, but or from the mop during wet mopping. Um, Solid bottom shelf. And although it's not required, now the solid bottom shelf is required, and it should be 8 to 10 inches off the floor. You cannot store anything sterile closer than 8 inches to the floor. And although not required, having a solid top shelf will help to better protect the items on the cart, because then the little tiny dust particles rain down might not be able to land on the sterile items. And the top shelf needs to be no closer than 18 inches to the ceiling, because that's where the fire suppression heads are, and it's a fire code that you can't have them closer than 18 inches to the ceiling. So keep that in mind when you're storing things on the top shelf. Go get your yardstick. Okay, things that are sterilized in-house. They should not be touched until they reach ambient room temperature. Okay, and I told you about that. They can be contaminated by strike-through. Before you go ahead and put them into the sterile storage area, you should check all indicators. And also make sure that there's the load information, the locks are intact, the tape is not peeled off on a wrapped tray, the filters are in place top and bottom. Don't forget to check underneath. And you should never drag a wrapped tray, because this can cause holes in the wrap. After you get out there and you see holes in the wrap, and you start to understand how bad it is, and you're going to wonder why we can't have everything in a rigid container. Well, we can't. Some of the vendors' sets, actually most of the vendor sets, have to be wrapped due to the fact that they don't make containers that are compatible with the sets. Unless they do. There are some. You should never stack wrapped trays, because if you do, you're causing compression damage. Okay, think about this. The weight limit on a wrap, on the heavy duty wrap, the 600 series, is it's 25 pounds. So if you have a 20-pound tray and put a 20-pound tray on top of it, you have 40 pounds of weight on the bottom of that wrap. So you've exceeded the weight limit. Another reason you should never stack trays is because when you do, the lower trays, they get the sterile air pushed out by force, and then when you remove the weight, unfiltered air is allowed to come back in. Rigid containers can be stacked, however, not too high. You should go by the manufacturer's instructions on these containers. There's a potential for gasket damage on the lid, or the lid lock could become damaged. So let your facility's policy guide you on that. Purchased pre-sterilized items. If you're following along, I'm looking at page 348. Outside shipping containers. Again, you should never bring them into the department. Cardboard boxes should be removed from this area as quickly as possible. What we're talking about here is cardboard, like a tissue box. Can you hand me that tissue box? Thank you, my lovely assistant. A tissue box, that's cardboard. The stuff that the outside shipping container, that is corrugated board. They're two different things. Cardboard should be removed from the sterile storage area as soon as you can. Corrugated board or plastic totes should not be brought in there whatsoever. That's why we have a breakout room, remember? Okay, I don't want to say most, because I've never looked at every single item, but many, if not the majority of the items that come in already sterile have an expiration date. And this expiration date doesn't necessarily reflect the sterility. It's not like it takes a bacteria 3.5 years to chew through the package. What it is it's usually related to stability of the contents of the package. So there are things that are made of rubber and other man-made materials, and most packaging materials themselves do have a out date, because when they manufacture these packaging materials and they test them to see how long they can remain an effective barrier packaging, they don't test them into infinity. They'll test them for 6 months, a couple of years, whatever the case may be. And then when the packaging material is no longer going to be an effective barrier, or cannot be relied upon to be an effective barrier because the manufacturer hasn't tested it that far out, then that's an event. And an event could be something has expired because it's reached its expiration date, or you've dropped it on the floor, or somebody sneezed on it. I know that sounds gross, but these things are all the kind of things humans do. If you drop something on the floor, it's not sterile anymore. It's not sterile. Even if it was not sterile yet, if you drop it on the floor, it should be repackaged before it's sterilized, because it could and likely does have a hole punctured in it. So there's time-related sterility with expiration dates, and then there's event-related sterility. An event could be that the time-related sterility is over, so that could also be an event. Does that make sense? All right. It's important that you always handle sterile items carefully. You shouldn't do things like pick up a whole bunch of sterile items in your hand like this, like a whole bunch of peel packs, and carry them like this, because you're pushing the packs together. Tips of forceps will poke through the plastic. I know the plastic is more durable than the paper side of the pouch, but it's not indestructible. When you're picking up a bunch of wrapped items, like a bunch of Diva retractors or Richardsons or something, and you're holding them like this, or you're holding them close to your chest, you're pressing all the sterile air out, and then when they decompress, they're going to pull unsterile air in. So handle them all like they're yours and you care about them. Don't carry sterile items under your arms or close to your chest. They should not be carried in big bunches. And what you're doing when you're using those kind of handling methods is you're causing events to happen. Even if you don't see it, there's not going to be an indicator that pops out on the package saying, bing, no longer sterile. You just have to know all of this. Proper handling. So a sterile storage area needs to be set up in a way that we can monitor events. That means it should be no traffic. It's not a shortcut. It should be low traffic. People only go in there when they have business in there. There should not be opportunity for things to be bumped off the shelf or ran into by carts. The air pressure, temperature, and humidity need to be kept in a certain range. And so we can't possibly 24/7 monitor every aspect of every sterile storage area, but we can certainly do everything we can. And when in doubt, throw it out. Walk through your sterile storage area. Look for things that aren't right. Look for tape that's missing, stickers that are missing, locks that don't look like they're intact. Check the lock. Look for filters. Sometimes when the OR takes something to use, they start to open it, and then they're like, oh, I don't need this. So they'll put it back on the shelf, or they'll send it back to us to put on the shelf. So every time something goes onto the shelf in sterile storage, it should be inspected. Every time it comes off the shelf before it's taken to the user, it should be inspected. If they don't use it before it gets put back on the shelf, it should be inspected, because events happen. Okay. So stock rotation, this is really important. Okay. Note that items with expiration dates should be used in the order of their expiration dates, with the items that will expire first being used first. So, first in, first out, or FIFO, is the rotation of stock. You got a shipment of ace bandages in on Tuesday, and they went into the bin. And you got another shipment in on Wednesday, and they go into the bin, placed in a position where they're going to be used last. But if the expiration date is sooner than the ones you received on Tuesday, then they should be placed in the bin with the expiration date making them the first out. Does that make sense? Okay, I hope so. Basically, I'll use milk. So you got some milk at the store on Tuesday, and the expiration date is April 8th, and then you went again and said, I need more milk, and you got milk that's expiring on April 7th. You're going to want to use April 7th expiration date first. It's important that you rotate your stock. The longer something's sitting on the shelf, the more opportunity it has to experience an event which would render it useless. Sterile storage needs to be cleaned. Sterile storage needs to be cleaned. So just like the rest of the department, sterile storage needs to be cleaned. You can often you can just take the carts, empty them, and put them in your cart washer, which is if the carts are compatible with the cart washer, if they're not going to get destroyed, that's great. But you need to make sure the carts are dry before you put anything sterile back on them. Alcohol can be used as an agent for drying. You can just take an alcohol rag and wipe down the cart. The last portion of chapter 16 is just really going over the importance of making sure that everything is clean and up to par. I'm going to let you read that on your own, just like the entirety of chapter 16. Read this on your own if you haven't yet, and then you'll be ready. Thank you, and I'll see you for chapter 18 soon.